Sanctions can starve people, they can keep them from getting medicine, and they can even get racists out to vote. But that's about it. Professor Richard Wolff weighs in. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Professor Richard Wolff is on the line with us, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. His latest, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, now available also as an ebook. And rdwolf with 2fs.com, his Twitter handle, Prof. Wolff, as in Professor Wolff with 2 Fs. And Dr. Wolff, the sanctions on Cuba are back in the news. President Obama had removed some of those sanctions. Donald Trump put them back on. Now there's a lot of pressure on Joe Biden to remove them, and hopefully he will do so. I think it's just good policy. But in the larger frame, in the kind of grand scheme of things, have economic sanctions ever worked as a foreign policy tool? And for that matter, do they even make sense, if not for foreign policy purposes, economic sense?
Well, the short answer to your question is they don't work and they don't make any sense. That is, they don't make any sense as policy or as economic objectives of any kind. They do make sense in the pandering to particular groups of voters, and I think that's mostly what these things are about. And let me explain. The sanctions against Cuba, which are a good example, but we could use those in place against Venezuela or those in place against Russia and all the others. They tend to, unless they're very unusual, they tend to harm large groups of people. In the case of Cuba, literally the entire economy because of that, the way they're structured. And what that does is hurt everybody. And that doesn't make the United States any friends. Number two, it solidifies the opposition to the United States. It organizes people to support their own government because they're all together, people and government, struggling against the imposition of the sanctions, at least symbolically. Then it irritates, let me put it this way, it irritates our allies because these sanctions are then used to punish companies, say in Europe, that do business with Cuba or that do business with Venezuela or that do business with Russia. And this irritates them because they're their own businesses. They don't want foreign governments telling them what they can or cannot do any more than American companies would like it. And then here comes the economics. They're easily evadable. In other words, you can get around them. If you can't trade directly with somebody, okay, then you have them send it to a third country, and then it comes from there to you. That way you're not violating, strictly speaking, what the law or the embargo or the sanction specifies. They're nuisances at best. Their economic effect is very small. And here's the bottom line. They haven't worked. We've been sanctioning countries left and right. No one in the world sanctions other countries like the United States. We are the global bully in that regard. Everyone sees it in that way. It doesn't do us in the long run any good as a nation to do it. But here's what it does. It does, and in the case of Cuba, it's very obvious, it does pander to whatever voters, Cuban refugees that have come to the United States, get them to be less hostile or more sympathetic, and so it plays to that kind of voter audience. In other words, it's a domestic tool used for domestic political advantage. Economically and politically, in terms of its effects abroad, zilch.
So it seems to me like it's almost a form of warfare, a low-grade form of warfare that doesn't involve bombs and bullets, in as much as when people in other countries feel like they're under attack, in a war, there's this, rally around the leader effect. And we certainly see that, we've seen this in Cuba now for 70 years. And yet, there needs to be, or I think there's a kind of a general consensus that there needs to be some sort of response to things that are done that are, for example, I think you've got Joe Biden now going after, some of the folks in Russia over the poisoning of Navalny. Weirdly, he's not going after Putin, who apparently ordered it, or the giant hack in 2017, apparently also from Russia. How can a country respond in a way that doesn't involve bombs and bullets, and that does cause another country to say, maybe we shouldn't do this again because there will be a price to pay? I mean, is there an economic vehicle for that?
Not much of one. I mean, let's be real honest, at least for a moment, to look at it from the standpoint of other countries. Around the world, it is widely believed that the United States has intervened in elections in other countries for decades and decades, using sophisticated or not sophisticated military, civilian mechanisms. The spectacle of the United States being angry at other countries for doing what it itself has done strikes everyone as odd. If you wanted to say something, there are forums in the world where you would be listened to, where you are not required to bully anybody. You can demand meetings in the United Nations. You can make a public fuss over it. You can demand that the International Court get involved. There is a whole variety of ways of making it politically and ideologically uncomfortable for the other side. That doesn't work all that well either. I don't want to be misleading anyone. But these economic sanctions were designed to make it appear, and that's all it is, appear that they're somehow harsher or they're somehow more effective. They aren't. They're an admission that there isn't all that much you can do if you don't like the behavior of other governments. It's a normal thing in our world, I wish it weren't, that we don't like what all different kinds of governments do. But as Mr. Trump showed us, and as Mr. Biden has showed us again, even when we know, as well as we'll never know anything, that the head of Saudi Arabia arranged for and sanctioned the literal butchery of a journalist that was critical of him, neither the President Trump nor President Biden saw fit to do pretty much anything significant in terms of the relationships between us and that country. And the world sees it. So if you still keep doing this kind of symbolic slapping people on the wrist, it looks more and more like what it is, which is political pandering to voters at home with something that isn't scary, isn't dangerous, doesn't work, but looks like something.
Would a middle ground? I mean, you know, thinking from 60,000 feet, looking at this like from the point of view of the United Nations. You know, how do you pull into reasonable behavior a rogue state? Do you withhold foreign aid? I mean, because if you're not going to use troops or bombs, pretty much all that's left are, you know, jawboning or economics. Or am I missing something?
No, you're not. But to do something that's really economically effective, A, you'd have to have a weapon that allows you really to do that, and we don't have that. Or you could use so massive a weapon that it would have such devastating effects that it would be effectively counterproductive because it would hurt too many people in too obvious a way. It's very easy in these governments, even when you have a general sanction, to shift the burden of whatever the sanctions are off of the people who make political decisions in these countries and on to the people who don't and who are made to suffer even though they're not responsible for what these governments did. It's frustrating. I understand that. It's frustrating for other countries to watch what the United States does that they don't like and don't agree with. But one of the reasons you have the United Nations, and you had the League of Nations before it, was we're not supposed to interfere in each other's internal events, and sanctions are a way of trying to do that, and they just don't work. That's why they've never worked in the past. We don't have policies in Russia that we like, or Venezuela, or Cuba, and that's despite having done this for such a long time.